Grant, Managing Partner at Nexia ASR, joins me today, and Phil recently spent some time with businesses looking at what's going on in their HR departments. I thought we could talk about that today, Phil.
Happy to.
First, what is the Human Resources Department meant to do? Everyone, talks about an HR department glibly, but when I certainly started out in a career, none of the businesses I worked for had an HR department. What is its role?
Look, I think there's a number of levels to the role. There can be a pure administration function, and in organisations where you get a reasonable number of employees, there's lots of pieces of paper and processes that you've got to follow through. Industrial relations rules are quite complex these days, and you really do need somebody who can track all of that and manage all of that, maintain employee files and make sure certain things are happening in the organisation, or you can get yourself in strife very quickly. So at its sort of basic level, there's that sort of administrative function. But really for organisations who rely heavily on the people, which most of us do, you really need somebody who's a bit more strategic in terms of their thinking, in terms of learning and development, critical, particularly in an organisation like ours. Important to make sure that people are being challenged on both in a technical side and on what we call a soft skills side. So that's important. And also just understanding, performance drivers, understanding how that works, understanding the culture of the organisation and having strategies around that. Now, these are specialist areas. I mean, people go and do degrees or masters on human resources, and it's a specialist area. I think what tends to happen though, if they're not the right type of person, it becomes a bit soft, and it doesn't become commercial in its endeavour. And so these people who have perhaps all these skills develop a personal relationship, because they're usually personality types who go in there who get on well with people, which is what you want, but they sort of sometimes forget the hard-nosed process that needs to happen in business. And I find, and from talking to other businesses, that is a common thread and has been a common thread. And I think also over this sort of recent 2 or 3 year period where we've had this downturn and there's been some pressure on people and organisations to either reduce their headcount or to reduce the hours of their headcount, or come up with some innovative way to manage their human resource. I think there's been a tendency for the human resource managers not to have hard and difficult conversations with their team members.
Then what effect does that have on the business? Because if the Human Resources Department is seen as the soft place where your needs are met and there's a good friend to go and talk to, what happens if your role is no longer needed, or you're not really great at what you do anymore? Yeah,
look, it's a difficult one. I think there is a bit of that sort of protecting your own turf, and particularly because you're probably privy to some of the difficult conversations at a higher management level about what's going on in the organisation from a human resource perspective. And I'm sure in a lot of instances in organisations they were having to deal with some pretty hard decisions, and they probably knew the writing was on the wall for them too. So it's difficult, but that's life.
That's the job.
That's life, and you'd expect that's part of it. And unfortunately, we're in we have been in difficult economic times, and obviously if you've got a headcount that has to reduce, you've got to manage that. But I think a big part of that is, we talk about performance management, and a lot of good organisations have a process around that. And I think if that process is working effectively, and I'm not saying it's easy to have it working effectively, but if it is, the conversations about less than good performance should be happening on a regular basis through a process. And it's not just with the HR manager; they facilitate that through a process, but it's with the the management process in an organisation. So then you tend to deal with problem people, or people who perhaps aren't fitting what needs to happen in the organisation on an ongoing basis. But I think it's fair to say that prior to the downturn that we've had, those hard, difficult conversations weren't had because there was a shortage of people.
So you just take any people
that
were available,
and you hang on to people,
yeah.
Perhaps. And I think a lot of people use the GFC as an opportunity to deal with poor performance too.
In terms of the HR manager, then it sounds to me that businesses are finding it a real trap if they've hired an HR leader who is too much of the personality and too popular with the troops. Is that the case?
Look, I think there's always that danger, you need that balance. I mean, you know, an HR manager in a reasonable organisation, and even in a smaller organisation, you know, they need to have a commercial mind, because you know we all know human resource management of our human resources in most organisations is critical, but there needs to be a commercial part to it. I mean, you know, you got one extreme where you can just spend, and it's nice.
It's a never-ending bucket of money.
But at the end of the day,
it's got to be earned.
Well, there's two parts to it. First of all, you know, there's an enterprise there that needs to survive, and if the organisation doesn't survive, well, it's all irrelevant. Excuse me. You know, it's all irrelevant because the organisation won't be there, and nobody will have a job. So, you know, the continued success of an organisation really works to everybody's benefit.
Thank you for your time today, Phil.
Thanks, Fiona.
I've been speaking to Phil Grant from Nexia ASR.